Hymn 282, hymn 282 is what we're singing this morning. We are in Genesis chapter 7 today. Genesis chapter 7, might even get into chapter 8. We'll see how much talking we do. And I'm sending around, this is the volunteer sign up for the All Hallows Eve event. And Susan told me that we need a few people yet to participate in the labyrinth, to be part of the labyrinth on that night. It's on a Thursday night this year. So I'm going to pass that around. Is there a place to sign up here, Susan, for that? Exit the labyrinth? No. Interpreters. Interpreters. Looks like we've got half a dozen. We need a few more. A few more that night if you're available. So there we go with that. And I was looking over the recording that we had on YouTube of last week's lesson, and someone had asked a question, and I'm going to kind of address it here to get us started, and then we'll get into chapter 7. Somebody asked about how long Noah was in the ark, how long all of this took. And so I studied that a little bit this week, and I'm going to throw some numbers up on the board for you, just so you have this as a reference. So Moses tells us that it happened in the 600th year of Noah's life. It starts in the second month and the 17th day that the flood starts. And y'all know how long it rained, right? 40 days, 40 nights, okay? So we add 40 days here. And then it talks about the water being on the earth for 150 days. Oh, I'm making a mess here. About 5 months. is how long that was. And then that's just a step in the process. There's even more time when it's on the earth, and he goes to the 10th month, which is going to be about 300 days. He tells more of the story from around the 10th month. And how you count all of this, it probably depends on how you read it a little bit. To be sure on things, I'd have to go back and look at it in Hebrew, and even then there's some ambiguities in the way that Moses records it. Somewhere around 340 days, or depending on how you're counting, might be 318. That's when he lets out the raven. And then about 7 days later, so we'll do plus 7, he sets out the dove, sends out a dove. And then another 7 days in there, sends out another dove, and eventually the dove does not come back. Okay, and that's when he knows it's safe. The dove found a place to land out there. And what you get at the bottom of all of this, I'll write it down here at the bottom. Well, I made the note in my Bible. You got to look at that. Is they open up the ark. He says it's the 601st year of Noah's life. It's in the 2nd month, and I think it was the 27th day. Let me check that. Yeah, the 27th day. We'll see that as we read. 27th day. So how long is he in the ark? A year and about 10 days. Depends on how you're counting some of this. But he walks us through. He gives us different numbers at different times, mentions different things, and gives us a sense of how long this all went in the ark. Go ahead.
The question is, when the last dove was sent out,
Yeah.
He never came back.
Yeah.
That does not mean that he was seeing land.
Okay, the previous dove, though, he had let the dove out, and it came back with an olive branch.
Yeah.
So there must have been enough cleared space for the plants to start growing again. And this time when he lets the dove out, the dove says, "It's nice enough out here. I'm not going back.
Okay.
I'm done with that ark."
So he was seeing in the distance possible land there?
Well, the scripture says that he opens up the ark at a certain point. I think that's around day 300. He opens it up, and he can see the mountains.
Okay.
So they're starting to see all of that.
Okay.
So we're going to walk through, and you're going to see those details
Yeah.
as we go through the story here in chapter 7. Good questions. Let's jump in. Chapter 7, verse 1. And may I have a volunteer to read verses 1 through 5? Verses 1 through 5, Genesis chapter 7.
And the Lord said unto Noah, Come thou and all thy house into the ark, for thee have I seen righteous before me in this generation. Of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by sevens, the male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by two, the male and his female. Of fowls also of the air by sevens, the male and the female, to keep seed alive upon the face of all the earth. For yet 7 days, and I will cause it to rain upon the earth, 40 days and 40 nights. And every living substance that I have made will I destroy from off the face of the earth. And Noah did according unto all that the Lord commanded him.
All righty, thank you, Jerry. So here we are. We're at the beginning of getting things onto the ark, getting ready for the ark. His household is going in. What's the reason they're going in? Verse 1. You are righteous. What does that mean? He believes in God. He has faith, for sure. He's holy. He obeys God. Yes, these are all features of righteousness. That he's walking in the way of the Lord and wants to do things the way the Lord says. So that these are the reasons God separates Noah and his family in that generation, he says. Verse 2. How many pairs of clean animals? 7 pairs. How many pairs of unclean? It's it'd be 1 pair, wouldn't it? It'd be 1 pair. That is 2 animals. Now, if you're reading the children's books, what do they always tell you? They just focus on the 2 by 2, don't they? They only tell you about the 2 by 2. They don't tell you about these clean animals coming in great numbers. You don't hear about that. What's a clean animal and what's an unclean animal? Clean is something that you eat, for sure.
Didn't it have something to do with split roads also?
Yes, and in the law of Moses it gives details. Clean animals among the mammals are ones that have a split hoof and they chew the cud. Okay? So that would be cows, sheep, goats. You'd also include what we consider wild animals, which would be things like deer, antelope. Things along those lines would come in those pairs. Okay? This is going to be stuff like your dog and your cat. Pig, because pigs have a cloven hoof, right? But they don't chew the cud. They just swallow everything. We were out at Slate Run this week. Susan and I went for a run, and they have a historic farm out there. And we went up to the pig pen, and they have some big pigs out there. Wow. And then somebody was telling me that in California now, the price of bacon has gone up to $27 a pound because of all the regulations surrounding how the hogs are raised. $27 a pound. Aren't you glad you live in the Midwest? Go ahead.
Comment on that.
Go ahead.
California, it's not because of how they're raised. It's because they will not let them come in. They won't bring anything in from out of the states.
Oh, okay. So it's only California raised hogs.
That's right.
But they had passed laws about the size of the pen they were going to be in, and a bunch of other things that are still complicating for farmers.
That's still going on too.
Yeah.
The way they raise them.
Yeah. So yeah, we eat hogs, but the ancient people were wary of eating hogs. Why would you be wary of eating a hog if you were an ancient person?
Spoiled easily.
Spoils easy? Trichinosis. Okay? They get a little worm in them because of the way they eat. Those piggies I saw out there on the farm, they were just lying in the stuff. You know? They're just lying there in all that stuff. They're pigs, right? Yeah, so God distinguishes, or Noah distinguishes, in what he brings on. He brings extra pairs of the edible animals. Okay? These are also the animals that were typically used we put Eid up here, they were used for the sacrifices. The sacrifices in the Old Testament. We're going to see why that's important at the end of the story. Okay? Let's move on here. Verse 3, the 7 pairs of the birds of the heavens also, male and female. And he doesn't specify. It makes you wonder whether it's 7 pairs of clean birds, because things like doves, what we would call pigeons, were used as animals of sacrifice. They were edible birds. There's lots of birds that are not edible, okay? Basically, unclean animals, anything that's a predator is an unclean animal, okay? typically speaking. You could probably put chickens up here. We saw chickens on the farm out there too. How many? He doesn't go into those same details on the birds as he does the other animals. Verse 4, 7 days I will send rain on the earth. So Noah has 7 days to get all of this on the ark, all the animals. 7 days. Does a week sound like enough time to load a tanker? Because that's how big this thing is. It's huge. Absolutely huge. And this is something I like in the children's books, is they often have the animals kind of walking in together in a row like they're on parade, you know, like they've been training with the Ohio State Band to march together. And that's a cute thing, I think, that makes sense, that the animals come to Noah and that he's not around, you know, running around chasing all of this, because it's all part of God's work and God's plan. So, I will send rain on the earth 40 days and 40 nights. Every living thing that I have made I will blot out from the face of the ground. And Noah did all. He did all that the Lord commanded. So there's an illustration of Noah's righteousness. Someone read for us verses 6 through 10. 6 through 10.
And Noah was 600 years old when the flood of waters was upon the earth. And Noah went in, and his sons and his wife and his sons' wives with him, into the ark, because of the waters of the flood. Of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth. There went in 2 and 2 until Noah into the ark, the male and the female, as God had commanded Noah. And it came to pass after 7 days that the waters of the flood were upon the earth.
Okay, so here is the march of the animals in those 7 days. A few of them would have been flying, perhaps, getting into the ark. Says how old was Noah when this started? 600. Let's talk about that for a minute. Do people today live to be 600 years old?
In dog years.
Feels like it. Thank you for that, Jerry. He said feels like it. Feels like it's 600 years old. Can a human being live to be hundreds of years old? Apparently. Yeah, it's described here. Go ahead.
With God's blessing.
With God's blessings. Okay. Things were different early in creation. That's what Genesis describes to us.
I think they ate a lot better.
They ate better?
No preservatives.
No preservatives. Well, aren't the preservatives supposed to help you live longer?
No, only the food.
No, only the food helps you live longer. So let's talk for a minute about the science of aging. This is much studied these days because there's so many of us baby boomers around, right? And people are trying to understand aging and how it happens and how to deal with it. And one of the things that they've learned is on our chromosomes in each of our cells, hopefully I'm spelling this correctly, there's something called telomeres. Telomeres in our cells. And here's how they work. As the cells divide to maintain that part of the body, I'm just going to draw, this will be the end of a cell, okay, or the end of a chromosome out this way. Every time a cell divides, it loses a little bit of its telomere. Probably from the Greek word for end, or the end of something, telomere. So each time your cell needs to divide, you lose a little bit more. And what they find is that some people have thicker or longer telomeres. on their cells. And guess what happens with those people? They naturally live longer. They naturally live longer. The cells don't wear out on their bodies. And so the scientists are looking at this and they're wondering to themselves, if we could figure out how this works, could we keep people young for much longer? In the sermon today, I talked about what they call immortal cells. In this case, though, it's a cancer cell. But these cells replicate and replicate and replicate, and they don't wear out. They don't stop. The limits that we have on our lives, well, do they have to be there? Only time, I suppose, is going to tell us whether human beings today can extend their lives longer. So, I look at things like that and I think, well, you know, it's hard to imagine 600 years of life. It's hard to imagine. And yet, even the science points that this sort of thing might be possible. It's pretty fascinating. So, any questions about this? Jerry, go ahead.
Not a question, because I don't understand the science of all of this.
Of aging, yes.
Of aging. But I don't find 600 years to be outlandish. I mean, you had to populate the earth.
Yes.
All right, so they had to live longer. And it's what God did.
Yes.
Regardless of all the science, it's what God had done.
Yes.
And you have to look at it proportionally, because they didn't start having children until about 135 years old, or at least around that time.
Okay.
Which I don't know if it was just their teenage years.
Yeah.
Who knows? But certainly it was their reproductive years.
Okay.
All right, and that went on for long periods of time.
Yeah.
But it's biblical, it's necessary.
Yes.
And certainly after the flood, and those, Noah and his family, they had to live long years because you had to repopulate the earth. The science is probably there.
Yeah.
I don't understand it.
Yeah.
But if it's there, God put it there.
Yeah. Yeah. So God made us to be enduring, didn't he? He made us this way. This is what Genesis presents to us. He didn't create us for death. He created us for life. That was God's intention. And Genesis records this. Now, what we see as time goes on with that information about the lengths of life is they get shorter and shorter as time goes on. So by the time you're in Genesis chapter 12, most people are not living that long. There's some exceptional people like Abraham and such. As far as when they started having children, I think if you look in Genesis 5, Enoch is recorded as having a child as early as 40 years old. So he was a quick study. He was a quick study. So yeah. Where was I? What was I going to say now? I'm off track. It'll come back. But God tells them, fill and subdue the earth. This is a part of it. When you look at the genealogies, remember, just because they mention a year in which a child is born, that doesn't mean it's their first child. What Moses is doing is he's recording the line of Seth leading down to Abraham. So he's only mentioning the persons that fit in that genealogy. So there might have been dozens before and dozens after. Okay? So those are things to remember when you're reading those early chapters of Genesis. So, Noah builds him an ark. It takes him quite a while. I'm not sure what year God called him in. If anybody knows it, shout it out. But he and his sons put this thing together. God's filling it. All the animals come by, even the creeping things. Lord have mercy. And someone read for us verses 11 to 16, verses 11 to 16.
In the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month, the 17th day of the month, the same day were all the fountains of the great deep broken up, and the windows of heaven were opened. And the rain was upon the earth 40 days and 40 nights. In the selfsame day entered Noah and Shem and Ham and Japheth and sons of Noah and Noah's wife and the 3 wives of his sons with them into the ark. They and every beast after his kind, and all the cattle after their kind, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth after his kind, and every fowl after his kind, every bird of every sort. And they went in unto Noah into the ark, 2 and 2 of all flesh, wherein is the breath of life. And they that went in male and female of all flesh, as God had commanded him, and the Lord shut him in.
Okay, thank you, Mike. So some of this is repeated from things that went on earlier. Moses is emphasizing the gathering of the animals and how they came together. But the first part of the verse here gives us a little bit of detail about the nature of the flood. Let's see, we have the dates there. On that day, he says, all the fountains of the deep were opened. So the start of it is not with rain, is it? All the fountains of the deep are opened, and then comes the rain for 40 days, 40 nights. So there's actually, as Moses describes it, 2 sources of the water. The water comes from 2 different places, 2 different directions. What's the deep?
Underground water table?
Possibly. We have what they call aquifers that collect in the ground. The wheat that they grow out in Kansas is watered not just by rain. They pump, the farmers, they found this huge aquifer out there, and they pump up that water out of the ground and water their wheat to make it in that drier area. So it could be something like an aquifer. If I'm spelling that right, I'm not sure. Could be a tsunami. Deep usually describes the ocean in the scriptures. That's usually how it's used. So it could be things like ocean water, and the way the ocean water typically gets on the land, as we experience it, is a tsunami. Whoops. What causes tsunamis? Earthquakes. Earthquakes cause tsunamis. Sounds like a rough time to be alive, doesn't it? Whatever's going on. However, that those, if it's aquifers, and maybe it's both. However, that's getting out of the ground. It's going to be violent, isn't it? It's going to be violent, and we know from witnessing tsunamis, which are one of the worst forms of natural disaster that we see today. I think the most deadly natural disaster that we've witnessed is a hurricane. At times, hurricanes will form in the Indian Ocean, and they go up between India and Southeast Asia. They funnel right up into, I think it's Bangladesh, that's there, and there's people that live out, these poor people live out in the lowlands in that part of the world because there's no place else to go. There's so many people in that country, and it's been a terrible thing how many people have been taken away by those hurricanes in that part of the world. But it's that kind of event. It's not just, it rained this week, and it was a nice rain. I didn't have to go out and water flowers a couple days. I liked that. It's not that kind of rain. It's violent. This is a violent condition on the face of the earth, and making conditions unsurvivable. Yeah.
I have an inkling of this way his fountains work. In the Canary Islands, they got the lava coming out. I saw pictures on the news the other day. That is flowing faster than I've ever seen any lava that they showed, like in Hawaii.
Yeah.
Places like, I mean, it looks like a running river.
Yes.
Down and it's destroyed, I don't know, most of the island out there.
Yes.
I think it's the Canary Islands.
Yeah, it's in that region, the Sargasso Sea, I think.
This would be a similar thing, it would hit them all at once.
Well, yeah, earthquakes are caused by that underground activity, isn't it? As we understand it today, there's plates that sit on the loose material underneath, which is the lava and things like that. And when that starts moving around, the earth starts moving around, and that's what makes these huge waves. We saw down in earthquake down in Indonesia not too many years ago, just put incredible amounts of water up on some of the islands down there and took out God only knows how many people. Yeah, Joe.
A bunch of Japanese islands too.
Oh yes, the Japanese had a tsunami off their coast.
They're still claiming they're bringing stuff floating around out there.
Oh sure.
From all that.
Yes. So when you imagine the flood, don't imagine a typical flood, okay? It's not like that. It's something much more dramatic, as indicated by this fountains of the deep that Moses describes. Things are really, really breaking apart and making trouble.
Is that the same aspect for like a fault line?
Yeah, faults.
You know, like out in California, how
Yes.
they say one of these days it's just going to break off and.
Well, probably not. The fault in California is a bypassing fault, where the two plates are rubbing against each other, and they slide like this. So the plates that break apart would be ones that go like this. So I'm afraid we're going to have California for a while longer. It's not going to just disappear. There's a fault that runs right up the middle of the Atlantic Ocean, and it can go down underneath the water and see this thing, and that is a separating plate. That one's moving apart. Okay, so Europe and the United States are getting further away from each other. Okay, so but when this stuff moves, that's when the volcanoes break out, because stuff breaks loose and there's a spot where it can come to the surface and it bubbles right out because it's hot.
I couldn't believe how fast it was flying.
Yes. And that has to do with the composition of the lava, what kind of rock is melted there. And some are slow movers, and that one was fast. I saw a video about it, and it was really flowing. Not as fast as water, but not too far behind it either. Yeah, it was fast. So you're getting a picture here of what these conditions were like as we look at what things happen today and the things that Moses describes here in the story and life of Noah. Let's jump to the end of that section that we just read, verse 16. And those that entered, male and female of all flesh, went in as God had commanded him. And then what does the Lord do? He shuts the door to the ark. He closes them in. What is this telling us about God and his role in all of this?
In control.
God's in control. God's in control. Yeah, I imagine when all of that rain started falling and the heaviness of that rain, I imagine when the fountains of the deep broke forth, Noah and his family must have been terrified. That must have just been an overwhelming experience. And yet here is this word from Moses about what happens, and it shows us that God is in control. Can we trust that in our lives today? Yes. Yes.
Can you imagine the people that were trying to get on the ark when all the water started hitting?
Mm.
They couldn't get on?
Yeah. I don't imagine they'd have been trying very long
No.
under the conditions that we're talking about.
They ignored it to begin with.
Yeah, they didn't come to the ark the way the animals did.
Right.
That must have been curious, though, for them, you know?
I'm sure they were.
When all the animals started showing up, going in.
What's going on?
Yeah. They must have wondered, what is this Noah doing now? Yeah, go ahead, Mike.
Is there any kind of account of where, like when this started, of where on the earth he was at and where he wound up at the end of that 40 days?
Well, we know that Eden, there are 4 rivers described for Eden, and 2 of them are the Tigris and Euphrates. So we know the general region in which Noah and his family were. The population of the earth is described as starting from that area. We also know that when the ark lands, it's on what mountain? Does anybody know? Ararat, Mount Ararat, which is actually 2 mountains. There are 2 mountains, 2 peaks of Ararat. We'll talk about that in a little bit further. But that's to the north. I think it's in present-day Turkey. And these are volcanoes. The mountains in Ararat are volcanoes. But that's where the ark is said to land. Let's keep going, though. We're almost done with chapter 7. Can you believe it? Someone read for us verses 17 to 24. 17 to 24.
And the flood was 40 days upon the earth, and the waters increased and bare up the ark, and it was lifted up above the earth, and the water prevailed, and were greatly upon the earth, and the ark went upon the face of the water, and the water prevailed exceedingly upon the earth, and all the high hills that were under the whole heaven were covered. 15 cubits upon did the water prevail, and the mountains were covered. How far did you say?
Down to 24.
Oh, yeah. And all flesh.
Thanks for volunteering.
And all the flesh upon the died that was upon the earth, both the fowl and cattle and the beast, and every creeping thing that creepeth upon the earth, and every man, all in whose nostrils was the breath of life, of all that was in the dry land died, and every living substance was destroyed, was upon the face of the ground, both man and cattle, and the creeping things, and the fowls, and the heaven that were destroyed for the earth, and Noah's only remaining alive, and they that were with him in the ark. And the water prevailed upon the earth 150 days.
Okay, thank you, Jim, for that long-suffering reading. I appreciate it. I appreciate it when people volunteer to read, and here's why. 2 things. It helps me save my voice. And the second thing it does for me is it gives me a minute to just think about the next thing I'm going to say. Okay? It gives me a break. So I appreciate it when you volunteer to do that, folks. You're a blessing to your pastor. Notice how it's recorded here. The first verse talks about the waters were 40 days upon the earth. But that's just a marker. That's just how long when the water, the rain and all of that stops and the storms or whatever. At the end of that chapter, that paragraph, it says how long were they upon the earth? 150 days. 150 days. So he's kind of giving you some description of along the way what happens, and you'll see that the numbers continue to increase until he's that year plus in chapter 8. So that's something to take note of. Don't just think 40 days and 40 nights. This goes on and on with this water. The disturbance he's describing is incredible. Hard for us to imagine. When I was a teenager, we had a flood in our valley. We live in a dairy farming region that has high hills on either side. First time Susan saw them, she called them mountains because they look that big to her, being from Indiana. To me, it's not a mountain unless it's bald on top. Okay, it has to have rocks showing. You have to get above that tree line. But these are big hills. And one August, a storm came in, and the storm clouds broke, and it dropped all of its rain on one of the hills. And it ran down that hill, tore out huge boulders, car-sized boulders, just rolled them down through houses and all of this, ran down into the valley where the creek is that goes back past our house, our property. Our house was up on a hill, thanks be to God. The waters almost got up to the barn, which was on a lower hill. But the little creek that I trapped muskrats in growing up as a kid, played in barefoot, that was a lake. And it stayed that way for days as that water was trying to get out. And in fact, after a couple days, we went out to gather up the cows, which were up in the high pasture on the other hill. And I was bringing them home. The cows didn't have any trouble wading through the remains of that flood water. I, as a 12-year-old, did. Almost got drawn into a culvert. I might not be here, except God's mercy was with me. There's some long grass I grabbed into and was able to pull myself out. But we finally got the cows home. The floods linger like that, don't they? Maybe you've experienced something like that. The rain comes down, and depending on your topography, it takes time for that water to go away. And these are the conditions that Moses is describing for Noah and his family. Incredible amounts of water have been let loose. How it all happens is hard for us to really appreciate, but the water stays on the land for a long time. Even covers the mountains, he says, verse 20, prevailed above the mountains, covering them 15 cubits deep. So this is a massive, massive flood that engulfs pretty much everything. Well, everything, the way he describes it. So that gets us through chapter 7. Shall we get into chapter 8?
I have a question, yeah.
Yes, sir. Go ahead.
How much is 15 cubits?
Okay, a cubit is the distance from your elbow to the tip of your fingers. It's about 18 inches. That was a standard measurement back in Old Testament times. And so it would be 15 times 18 inches. And if somebody wants to do that math, you could tell us how many feet it is.
So that would be how high the water rose.
How high above the mountains that he's talking about here.
Because the highest mountain is like 19,000 feet.
Yes. And so the question becomes, does he mean all mountains everywhere? Or is he talking about the mountains like of Ararat, where they land the ark?
Right.
Those would be the questions.
Well, the water covered the whole earth?
The flood was universal, as it's described by Moses. It was over the whole of earth. And it talks about everything dying.
So I would have to think that, yes, it would cover all the mountaintops by 15 cubits.
That's what Moses is describing.
Everest was completely underwater.
Well, when you start thinking about all of this, all kinds of questions start running into your head. With all of the geological things that may have been going on, was this mountain growing events? As these things were moving, as things were changing under the conditions.
Yeah.
I just finished reading, and this amazes me. I just finished reading my book I picked up on the summer, The Geology of Maine. And you're like, oh no, he's going to talk about geology again. Well, one of the things that the author writes about in there is that when the glaciers were on the land up there in Maine, the weight of the glaciers was so heavy that the land was pushed down below sea level along the coast of Maine. It's hard for us to imagine these things, isn't it? The kinds of forces that would be involved to bring all of these things about. But that's something that he's describing as he looks at the geology of Maine. And then as the glacier melted, the coastal land rose. We think of the land as being solid, don't we? But it's apparently floating on this ball of molten stuff under the ground. And so just like, if you go home, take an empty milk jug, cap it off, but fill your bathtub and push it down, it'll go down, but you're fighting it, aren't you? It wants to pop back up. And that's the way the land is riding on all of that beneath the ground.
The water, the aquifers and the water tables, underground water tables, as they were drained, as the fountains were pushing all this water up, that would have also helped in lowering the earth, I would assume.
Well,
and then once the water drained, filled these things back up, it would have pushed the earth back up again. That's just a thought.
Okay. I don't know if I'm keeping up with you on what all might have happened, but that we're talking about catastrophic things.
Oh, yeah.
That it's hard for us to even think about measuring. Did someone have a hand up over here? I thought I saw a hand wave. Okay, Jerry's got a hand up. Go ahead.
My curiosity is, was this flood and the effect more regional? I know the water was over the full earth, but if you take man, how far could they have migrated from the origin of the Garden of Eden? Okay, how far could they have gone? Could they really have gone out over the whole earth?
Yeah.
Secondly, the animals, the same thing kind of principle would apply is, God made them and he put them anywhere he wanted, but
sure.
like were animals from Kansas, as an example, going onto the ark.
Yeah.
That sounds facetious, but the point is that 7 days to load them on. I read there was approximately 7,000 species of animals. All right, so if they were all over the earth, that trip had to start a long time before and get them kind of lined up to go on there. And I hope I'm not just going too far adrift, but it seems to me that was it more regional? The water covered the earth, but the people and the animals were more from that region.
So I'm going to share some thoughts for you, Jerry. We start to get off into what might have happened as a part of what a story like this causes us to start thinking about. Well, how does that work? How did this happen? How might it have happened? And so what I'm going to say up here is going to be mights. Okay? First of all, remember that the word kind, the animals are coming by kinds. And that doesn't mean that everything that we call a species today would be coming to be on the ark. So for example, how many breeds of dogs are there today? There are a lot. I'm not sure how many there are. But the way Moses describes it, there would only be 2 dogs on the ark. And they might have been like wolf-type creature. Because what we call dogs and wolves and coyotes and foxes, they're all interrelated. And that would be more of the kind. When he says a pair comes, that's what he's talking about. So that brings down your numbers dramatically when you start thinking and seeing it that way.
But it also puts it more regionally.
Well, one of the things that the geologists tell us about the earth is that there was a time when all of the continents were pushed together. They call it Pangea. And that and that now the way they describe it, they would say over millions of years, those continents broke up and became the continents that we know today, that they drifted over time. Could it be that the ark is here and the animals have a lot shorter distance to walk, don't they, to get there? So these are all things we start thinking about, and we can't really answer, can we? We can't really answer them. So I would take the story as it's written.
By faith.
We're taking things by faith. I'll add this. Charlotte brought this up the last time we were together. She mentioned it after class. When folks began traveling around the world, they started hearing in all different places this common story about a guy who built a boat and saved the animals from a flood. The Near Eastern countries all have accounts of this. Okay? You go to places like, I think there's a story from Japan, for example, which is pretty far flung, has this kind of a story. You come over here to North America, they have this kind of story. So it's a common experience of people from around the world. There's a memory of a guy who saves the animals by putting them all on a boat. Now, the details of the stories differ in the different cultures as they describe it. But what do you make of something like that? Are these, the Bible describes us all being descendants of Noah and his family. Is the story passed down over generations and generations so that people all over the world hear this and learn about what happened with Noah and his family? Go ahead.
Well, this might add to it. They say the Japanese DNA is the same as American Indians. How could that be?
Yeah. It probably wouldn't be exactly the same, but it would be very similar.
I mean, they're related.
Yeah. So, yeah, the thought is that that people migrated out of Asia into North America.
You would think they'd be from China instead of Japanese.
Yeah. Yeah, we probably shouldn't get into all of that.
We'll just break it down.
Yeah. Later we're going to look at what they call the Table of Nations. I think it's in chapters 10 and 11, and it describes the spread of humanity across the earth. So we'll be looking at that kind of a question later. Today let's focus on how Noah and Moses describes the flood. And they describe it, Jerry, as a universal flood. And it challenges the mind to imagine it this way, to see it this way. It certainly does. But I'm going to stick by the story as it's given us. And not try to over-understand it, so to speak. Take it as it's given to us.
Real quick.
Jim, last word, and we're going to pray.
Theory about the land, like you have it there.
Yeah.
Didn't the Lord say He created the oceans?
Yes.
So there wouldn't be all land. There'd be a lot of water there.
Yes. Yeah. The waters are among the first things that he describes. Is separating the waters.
So
The waters from below from the waters above in
that's a
Genesis
good
1.
theory, but with the way it says in the Bible, it doesn't make sense. I mean, in my mind.
Okay.
I don't know about everybody else's.
Yeah. Yeah. So we're talking about things that are remote from us
Yeah.
and from our experience.
Right.
And it's hard for us to figure things out. Anytime we start talking about the past and things we haven't experienced,
We've been there.
we start adding question marks behind everything we say. So we have to be careful about that. So we take Moses at his word with the story of Noah, because Noah was there to witness the events as Moses describes it. Let's bow our heads in a word of prayer. Gracious Heavenly Father, we thank you for the story of Noah and for the life and preservation described in this this account of what Noah experienced, how you brought him and his family and all of these wonderful creatures that we celebrate and love and enjoy, and even a few we might not be so grateful for. Lord, we thank you for the beauty of your creation and the way you preserved it for our sakes and for our benefit today. Help us, O Lord, to make the most of the life and the earth that you have given to us, to the honor and praise of your name, and in all circumstances, to trust that you are in control and that you will guide our lives. Through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.